We're going into part 2 of this podcast, which is the scam of the money system, the money matrix per se. When I did all that think work in part 1, was like, I need to learn more about money. I asked Chris Hopkins for some good resources, the hidden secrets of money.com. He took me there. Most of this information's from there, so hopefully that's a good source. And I educated myself in this past week, and what I learned about the government printing money is absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm going to try to explain it to you so that you can understand what it means that the government prints money, or if you've ever heard like the banks are evil, the central banking system, the Fed. Now, I'm not going to be perfect at this because I'm newly studied, but I hope that I can break it down for you. So, actually, I'm going to go into my deeper notes. Prepare yourself for the biggest scam in the history of mankind. It starts with the branch of the government called the Treasury. The Treasury creates something called bonds. What are bonds? Bonds are glorified IOUs. What is an IOU? IOU is literally what it sounds like. I owe you. If I give my brother a chocolate bar and he doesn't pay me for it, he doesn't have a chocolate bar to give me in return, he might say, I owe you one. I'm going to get you a chocolate bar in the future. That is essentially what a bond is. The treasurer creates a pretty piece of paper with numbers on it, nothing but a glorified IOU. That paper might say something along the lines of, loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period, I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion with interest. So the treasury creates this piece of paper. It has some dollar amount on it, and they sell it to you. So you pay them whatever, $10 million, and they say, I'm going to pay this back in 10 years with interest. Who does the Treasury sell these bonds to? The Treasury sells these bonds to the banks. So basically the Treasury says, I have a bond for $1 million, and then all the banks line up and they say, they have a bond auction. I don't know what that means, how that works, but essentially all these banks bid on this bond. One of the banks buys the bond and they all celebrate, because why would a bank be celebrating that they're going to pay $1 million for a piece of paper and then get interest in 10 plus years? Here's why the banks celebrate. Because the banks don't actually wait the 10-year period or whatever. The banks immediately take the bonds and they sell them to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is another branch of the government. So the Federal Reserve buys the bonds from the banks, and the banks bought the bonds from the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve buys the bonds with a check. And you know how if we were to write checks, I know my generation doesn't really know what a check is, but essentially a check is a piece of paper where you take money out of your bank account and I write, I'm going to give you $100, you take the check to your bank, and then the $100 comes into your existence. But if I'm writing a check, I have to have that amount of money in my bank account. However, when the Federal Reserve writes a check, they're writing a check from a bank account that has no money in it. How does that work? When they write the check, that money that they write the check for just comes into existence. So I hope that I'm explaining this well, but let me just lay it down simply. The Treasury creates a bond, which is a glorified IOU. They sell it to the banks. The bank goes and sells it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve writes a check for that bond. The bank account that the Federal Reserve uses has no dollars. So when they write that check, dollars of that check amount just come into the system, the money system that we use. So that's how money is made. Obviously, the Treasury is the one that actually prints it, but the Federal Reserve writing the checks is how money comes into existence. All right, this is a struggle to explain this stuff. So basically just know that the banks, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and that's how currency comes into existence. The Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs by trading with the banks. The glorified IOU from the Treasury is the bonds. The glorified IOU from the Federal Reserve is the checks. I hope this makes sense. That is how a portion of our dollars come into existence. Now, here is how another portion of our dollars come into existence. When you work and you get paid money, a salary, generally what most of the population does with that money and a salary is they take it and deposit it into their bank. So when you get paid, when I get paid, when a majority of people get paid, they take the money and they go and deposit it into the bank. Let's say you deposit $100 into the bank. What you might think happens is that the bank keeps all $100 in a vaulted safe, and that when you come back and you request $100, they give it back to you. But that's not actually what happens. What happens is that there's these things called reserve ratios. Reserve ratios vary, but for the purpose of this example, let's say you input $100 into your bank, and let's say the reserve ratio is 10%. What that means is that the banks legally have to keep 10% of your deposit in the bank. So you input $100, the banks legally have to keep $10 in the bank just in case you want it in the future. So then what do the banks do with the $90 that they're not keeping in the bank? They loan it out to another person. Let's say another person separate from me needs to buy a house. They come to the bank, they say, I need a loan. That person is going to get the $90 from the $100 that I deposited. But what if I go back to the bank and I say, I need all $100 back? Are they just screwed? Are they going to just give me $10 back? No. What they do is they create glorified IOUs, which are called bank credit, in your place. So digitally, they put that you still have $100 in your bank account, and you can go and spend this $100. You can go and spend the $100. So you aren't aware that your money isn't being kept because they put these bank credits in your account, and the bank credits operate just like money. In fact, the bank credits become money. So every time you deposit money into the bank and they loan out whatever percentage of your money and they put bank credit in your account, currency is being created. So currency is not just created by the government printing it, doing these exchanges from Treasury to Federal Reserve. Money is created every time you deposit into your bank. And I gave you the example of 10%. That means that $100 deposited into your bank, loaned out a specific amount of times, can become $1,000 of currency in circulation. And that's a 10% reserve ratio. Some reserve ratios are as low as 3% and 0%. So I don't know what the ratio of government created currency and bank created currency, but about 10 years ago, banks actually created, I want to say 92, in 2013, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence was not created by the government, but by the banking system, which is weird. Why would the government let the banking system create so much currency? And the banks were also the ones buying the bonds off of the Treasury, selling them to the Federal Reserve at a profit. So essentially, the banks are just profiting money. Because remember, or I guess not remember because I haven't explained this yet. Gosh, there's so much to say I don't even know where to start. Let's rewind a little bit. So I've explained to you how money is created. Why are we allowed to infinitely print money? And by we, I don't mean myself. I mean the government and the banks. Why are the government and the banks allowed to infinitely print money? I don't know if you know this, but the US dollar is a fiat currency. What is a fiat currency? A fiat currency is a currency that is not backed by gold or silver. Now, I don't know if anyone my age knows that currencies used to be backed by gold or silver, so let's rewind. Let's pretend you're in ancient Egypt, whatever, the first currency in creation was gold and silver. What makes money money? What makes a currency currency? This is the criteria to make money money. It has to be a medium of exchange. That means it can be exchanged for things. It has to be a unit of account, which means it has numbers attached to it. It has to be portable, can be transported easily. So for example, back in the olden days, people would trade cows and stuff, but you can't just throw a cow in your purse. So that's not portable. It has to be durable. At one point, people sold tea as currency, or they sold tobacco as currency, but those things aren't durable. They break apart easily. It has to be divisible. It has to be able to be divided. It has to be fungible. That means $1 in my pocket is worth the same amount of money as $1 in your pocket. Those are all the requirements for currency to become a currency. But money actually goes one step further. Money has to be a store of value. A store of value refers to an asset, currency, or commodity that you can save or exchange and retrieve in the future without any depreciation in value. So the difference between currency and money is store of value. To be qualified as money, you can't lose any purchasing power. So actually, when people call the dollar money, they're actually incorrect. And every form of money in the world that is a fiat currency, which means a paper bill not backed by gold, actually isn't a store of value. It doesn't retain its purchasing power. Why doesn't it retain its purchasing power? Because the government around the world, this is not exclusive to America, the government is printing more and more of the money. And the more you print of money, the more the prices cost. Therefore, the government can actually steal your purchasing power by printing money. So I hope I'm explaining it well because it's so confusing. This is where the money matrix is actually mind-blowing. You can have $10 and the government can have $10, and you guys should be able to equally buy $10 worth of assets. But the government can print $100 more. And now the government has $110, which their dollars will lose purchasing power, but they'll have more of the dollars, and therefore they can buy more stuff. Whereas your dollars, $10 won't be able to purchase what $10 used to be able to purchase because there's now more money in circulation. So just by printing, the person who prints the money actually steals purchasing power away from everyone who owns the money. And we shouldn't be calling it money. The person who prints the currency can steal purchasing power from everyone else who owns the currency. So, I mean, in part one, we already talked about how absurd is it that someone can print something for essentially nothing and then trade it for your time and energy. But then worse of all, they not only print it and trade it for your time and energy, they tax you on it. So they print it, trade it for your time and energy, and then request a certain amount of that back. And they steal your purchasing power by printing more of the currency, which is absolutely absurd. You as a citizen are just being absolutely dongle-cucked in every way possible. I actually forgot to mention a really important another way that you are getting screwed, which is that when you're taxed, you're told that your tax dollars are going to public roads, schools, whatever governmental programs the politicians are promising. A huge majority of your tax dollars are going to paying off the bonds that the government created. Remember a few minutes ago I told you how the Treasury creates bonds, and the bonds essentially say, give me $1 million, and in 10 years, I'll give you $1 million plus interest. And then they sell those to the banks, and the banks sell those to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve writes checks that come out of a bank account with $0. Well, someone still needs to pay those checks, those glorified IOUs. So who pays them? Not the government, not the banks, not the Treasury, our tax dollars. So The government prints something for free, trades it for our time and energy, then taxes us on it so that the government can use our tax dollars to pay off their own bill that they created so that they can steal prosperity from us. I hope that makes sense to you. I know it's so complicated, but it's just absolutely absurd. I needed to come in and make sure that you guys knew that. Wild. We need to get back to history. History used to be my least favorite subject until I started reading the Bible, so I'm sorry if you're suffering here. Gold was our first ever currency that hit all the things. It was a medium of exchange, a unit of account, portable, durable, divisible, fungible, store of value. Gold stored its value, so it was money and it still is money. How does gold store its value, but the US dollar doesn't store its value? Because gold has a limited supply. It can't be printed. There's no government that just prints unlimited gold. So therefore, because it can't be printed, it retains its value. And if you're wondering why all these people are buying Bitcoin and these digital currencies, it's because governments can't just infinitely print Bitcoin. Therefore, the limited supply makes it valuable. Lots of cryptocurrencies have values come from the fact that they can't be infinitely printed and they're not created by governments. So that's side note. I don't know enough about that to go deep into that. But why did we go from gold to dollars? And the reason is, my understanding is that eventually gold worked very well. You traded it. We had it in coins. It was durable, divisible, fungible, stored value. But essentially, we didn't want people to be... I can tell you the simple and historic reason. Simply put, I don't think people wanted to walk around with bags of gold. And less simply put, which I should just tell you the history because I'm already going this deep. Less simply put, during World War I and World War II, and you're going to learn how the US dollar becomes so powerful. Why is it the most powerful currency in the world? Here's why. Gold was the currency. Then countries advanced. We didn't want to carry around money bags of gold. So what we did is we created dollars. And the dollars actually had no value, but they signified how much gold you owned. So if I had a $20 bill, I could take that $20 bill and trade it for $20 worth of gold at the bank. This is what US dollars used to be. US dollars used to be a piece of paper that signified how much gold you owned. And if you gave someone $20, they now were legally entitled to $20 worth of gold at the bank, and they could go to the bank and cash that in. So what was the issue with this system? Why is our US dollar no longer backed by gold? And by the way, every fiat currency up until this point, remember, a fiat currency is a currency not backed by gold. Every paper currency up until this point, over 600 of them, collapsed that wasn't backed by gold. Not a single fiat currency in history has survived the long test of time, which you should be scared because all the currencies in the world are fiat currencies right now, and I'm going to explain to you how we got there. Essentially, we didn't want to carry around money bags of gold, so we created these dollars. These dollars signified how much gold you owned. $20 equaled $20 worth of gold. You could take that to the bank, cash it in. Life was good. Currency was money. Money was good. The US dollar was money at the time because it stored its value. World War I happens. World War II happens. What happens is on the other side of the world, all the countries are fighting each other. And in America, we're having the Industrial Revolution and we're just rinsing out guns. We're rinsing out food, supplies. And what do you think we're doing with the guns and foods and supplies? Well, all the other countries on the other side of the world are in war. We're selling them our guns, our supplies, our food. We're selling it for their gold. So during World War I and World War II, we're just rinsing gold. which is great because our dollar is backed by gold. Gold is a real currency. Our dollar just signifies that we own it, and we're absolutely rinsing. Awesome. Now, the issue, I need to find the accurate amount. By the end of World War II, the USA owned 2/3 of the world's gold because it sold goods and supplies to other countries who were in war in exchange to gold. So, after World War II, in 1944, the United States of America owned 2/3 of the world's gold, and the rest of the world shared 1/3 of the world's gold, and Europe didn't have any gold. So imagine this. All the world currencies are backed by gold, yet the United States, because they're selling all this equipment to people during war, acquires 2/3. One country acquires 2/3 of the world's gold, and all 140 other countries share 1/3 of the world's gold, and Europe, which is such a big part of the world, doesn't have any gold. So all these countries are freaking out about not having gold that they can back their currency on. So they don't want to become fiat currencies because every fiat currency in history up until this point has failed. So what do? They say, the United States has all that gold and their currency is backed by all that gold. So instead of backing our currency on gold that we don't have, let's back our currency on the US dollar, which is backed by all the gold. So that is how the US dollar became the strongest currency in history. Life is good. The USA has very strong money because the money is backed by gold, therefore it stores its value. But when all these other countries wanted to back their currency on our US dollar, we didn't create any limits on how much we would print. So we did have a finite, although we had a lot of gold, we had a finite supply of gold. And some silly goose in the government decided to just infinitely print money. And therefore, they created more money than they had in gold reserves. And so they had an issue. And the way they solved that issue was by going onto the gold exchange standard, which meant that they would still back the US dollar by gold. They would just back it at a ratio. So before, the $20 would go to the bank and you could trade it for $20 of gold. But now $50 would go to the bank and you trade it for $20 worth of gold. So the currency was still backed by gold, but a higher bill amount meant less gold amount, which is worrisome. Fast forward, the US has their own problems. They end up shipping gold around the world. They lose some of their gold, and then they print more and more money. And turns out they print way more money than they have gold, and they can't even ratio the amount of money they have to gold. In France, the president of France is like, yo, the dollar is not backed by sufficient gold. So he knows, because at the time you were allowed to trade your dollar for gold. So the president of France is worried because the USA is printing so much money that he goes, quick, let's cash in our US dollars for gold. So they send back all their US dollars and get the ratio of gold back to their country. Humans are such sheep-like creatures that all the other countries see what France is doing, and a bunch of other countries start requesting their gold for US dollars back. So now a bunch of countries around the world are requesting gold, which they're legally entitled to, because it says it on the bill, you can go change it for bank. And they start sending back US dollars, which is crazy. So the US lost 50% of its gold supply from 1959 to 1971, and they gained a bunch of dollars. And they realized if countries keep asking for their gold back, they're not going to have enough gold to give every country the amount of dollars they've printed. So they realize they're absolutely screwed, because if that happens, the whole world's economy is going to collapse, because every currency is based on the dollar and the dollar is based on gold. So I believe it was President Nixon essentially was like, dude, we have no choice. And he took the dollar off of being backed by gold. So on August 15th in 1971, the dollar standard starts and all the world's currencies are no longer backed by gold because the dollar was no longer backed by gold. So in the matter of one day, every currency in the world, which was backed by the US dollar, which was backed by gold, every currency in the world essentially became a fiat currency in the matter of one day, which I, with my limited understanding of this history and money, am confused why the world didn't riot and figure out a new monetary plan. But for some reason, the US dollar came off of gold and everyone was chill with it. And that's why the US dollar, up until this point, has been the strongest currency because all the other currencies are backed in the US dollar. But now, countries are starting to get worried because they're like, why are we letting the US dollar be so strong? Why are we all backed by the US dollar? Which is why you should be worried and you should go do your own research. I highly recommend the hiddensecretsofmoney.com. Absolutely great. I will link it down in this podcast below if you want to learn more in depth about what I'm talking about. So now, like I said, you can't have a relationship with someone you don't know. You can't have a relationship with money if you don't know it. Now I understand fiat currencies don't succeed. The dollar is a fiat currency. Not only is the dollar a fiat currency, it's printed by the government and the banks. The people who print it reward because they steal your purchasing power. What does it cost them to print it? Nothing. And then they change it for your time and energy, slavery. And that is being infinitely printed, so prices are going up. Basically, it's a lose, 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 lose to the average American. However, if you educate yourself, you can win in times of distress. Because if you own assets, that's why everyone says housing is so safe. If you own a house, the amount of dollars you pay for that house will always go up. But the house doesn't lose its... It's not that the house... If a house goes from $1 million to $3 million, it's not necessarily that the house got more valuable. It's that the currency lost its value. So you, as being a homeowner, are holding something that stores its value, aka money, and you're not holding something that loses its value, aka the US dollar, which shouldn't be called money. It should be called currency because it doesn't hold its value. Hopefully that makes sense. I know there's so much to unpack here. I highly recommend these resources. To recap this, money, part one, money is time and energy. The richest person is not the person who holds the most money. The richest person is the person who inputs the least and outputs the most because the goal is freedom. That was the takeaway from part one. The takeaway from part two is that the government prints how the government prints money, which is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury swap glorified IOUs, which are bonds and Federal Reserve checks. That brings currency into existence because when the Federal Reserve writes a check, they bring it out of a bank account that has nothing. So essentially, they just print that money into thin air, which is actually what they do. And then, the Treasury is the one who prints it, but beside the point. When a currency is not backed by gold, it fails, which means that the dollar should eventually fail and all fiat currencies should eventually fail, which might be why all these digital currencies are succeeding. I don't know which digital currency is the best, but considering Bitcoin went from $6 to $60,000, people clearly have trust in it. The dollar loses its value every year. Please don't go buy a bunch of Bitcoin because you heard this. Go do your own research. Same with gold. Go do your own research. You can't have a relationship with something you don't understand. The government and the banks steal your purchasing power and then tax you on it. Absurd. The government prints money for free and then exchanges it for your time and energy. Slavery. Wild. Depends on your definition of slavery, but I think it's wild. Now let's get to the good stuff, which is